Good now? All right. Yeah, so, yeah. It sounds strange, but that should be our greeting for the entire 50 days. And it's to keep things in mind. This ties a little bit into what I'll talk to you about today, but I'm just going to mention really quick that it's basically the entire reason why we should be joyful during these 50 days and for our entire lives, in this world and in the next. So anyway, really quick, like Abuna said, my name is Peter Pham, from New Jersey, originally Bergen Church, now in East Rutherford. Some of you may know me, some of you might not. Don't believe anything the ones that know me tell you about me. Anyway, I tend to have some standard disclaimers before I talk. My brain works a lot faster than my mouth does. So sometimes things make sense in my head, but don't come out quite right from my mouth, because one thought will run into the other. If I say something that doesn't make sense, feel free to ask questions. I don't bite, not typically. My wife accuses me of using big words. I do tend to use big words. If I use something you don't understand, again, raise your hand, ask. I actually have a problem gauging the volume of my voice. I can generally tell when I'm talking loud because my throat starts to hurt, but I can't tell if my volume drops. So if you have trouble hearing me, let me know. I'll raise my voice. Yeah, again, always ask questions. If I slip into a language that no one understands, call 911, I'm having a stroke. So,
you mean when you took in tongues,
yeah, I start talking in tongues or slip into something. Basically, everyone here knows all the languages I know. So, if someone doesn't understand what I'm saying, something's wrong. Also, I don't do spiritual talks. If you want spiritual, have Dr. Samir invite my wife. I do technical, boring, dry. I kind of like that sort of stuff. But anyway, topic I was told that is for today is basically I didn't quite understand the why are we seeking, what do we seek in heaven, but then the sort of the sub point of why do we do what we do. And for me, that's a very big thing for me, because a lot of people leave the church because they don't understand why we do what we do. They see it as pointless and it's a burden. So they go to places where they don't have to do what we do, and you're losing out and we're not understanding. That said, I'm not going to go through sort of a very technical, we do this because of this, we do this because of this. I mean, I can answer questions in regards to that, but that's not going to be what I'm discussing today. So we'll go into why we do what we do, why we're taught to do what we do. Whether or not we do it is a whole different matter, and that's between you and your father of confession or spiritual father. So, have I lost you guys yet? Also, if there's any complaints and you're not very happy, complain to Dr. Samir. He's the one who inflicted me upon you. So, question is, so who likes to be in church? Who likes attending liturgies? Who likes attending tasbihah? Right, show of hands, honestly, or not so much a show of hands, but just know silently to yourselves, answer the question. Who really enjoys actually being in a liturgy or being in tasbihah? Okay. Those of you who don't, you're not going to like heaven. Because basically, heaven at its core is what church is. It's an eternal liturgy. It's an eternal Eucharist, eternal communion. So if you don't like being in church, heaven, you might find heaven a little boring. You might want to go over to Muslim heaven where it's eternal feasts and rivers of alcohol, or go over to the Hindus and you get to relive life over and over again as different animals until you get it right. And we see this, it's in the scriptures. It's repeated, it's clearly in the book of Revelations. I tried to move into the 21st century and not write notes on paper, but due to technical glitch, I lost a good part of my notes. So, you want to have a Bible on them? Or pull them up on a phone, or...
Everyone now is going to take out their phones, pretending that they're looking into the Bible, and they're going to check their text messages or Facebook or something.
I figured they were already doing that. So,
Where do you want?
Revelation 2:7. Whoever grabs it first, just read out, or can someone pick? Dr. Smith pick someone? I just.
He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To him who overcomes, I will give to eat from the tree of life, which is in the midst of the paradise of God.
And continue on.
And to the angel of the church in Smyrna write, these things says the first and the last, who was dead and came to life. I know your work, tribulation, and poverty, but you are rich. And I know the blasphemy of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan.
All right. So it was part of it. The first part is they'll eat from the bread of life. Elsewhere, it'll say, well, he'll give you to eat from the hidden manna. And we know from this, what we learn in Tasbeha, which is basically just theology lessons put to music. So if you actually, and you guys are very lucky in that everything is, yeah. Thank you. So there's one thing. Yeah, very lucky in that you have everything in English now. So even if they're not singing in English, you can read along in English. Growing up, we didn't have English really. We didn't even have really English books until well into high school, I think. Just to show you how old I am. So you're very lucky, and when you're into Tasbih, pay attention to the actual words. Even if you're just standing there and don't know any tunes or anything, just read them along, because they are basically theology lessons put to poetic language. Anyway, so let's see. And I have a bunch of very scriptural lessons where it's going into the fact that in heaven it's the wedding feast. We are it's an eternal communion, basically. And this is part of the reason why there's a very famous saying by Saint Cyprian of Carthage: outside of the church there's no salvation. Why is that? And there are many other saints who reflect this saying. You have St. Ambrose, St. Augustine, even St. Jerome. They all have some sort of variation on that main thought of outside the church there's no salvation. Meaning that within the church we see a reflection of what's in heaven, and it's preparing us, and it's preparing us for heaven and getting us excited to get there by revealing glimpses of it. That's not to say if you're not in church, you're not going to be saved, but as Orthodox Christians, as an Orthodox Christian, I can only tell you where God is. I can't tell you where He's not. And I know for a fact God is in the church, in the liturgy, in the sacraments. He is there. Everywhere else, I don't know. So I can't speak for them. Definitely, if you're in this situation, you'll be saved or not. I know where he is. And that's how we should be when we speak to others. We don't know where God is we know he's everywhere, but we know for a fact he's here and you can find him here. So, why do we do what we do? It's training to get us ready for heaven. It's basically just a tiny glimpse of it. And actually, it's kind of apropos to the time we're living in. St. Augustine has a quote or saying to the effect that our lives on earth are like the days of Lent, where we're fasting and preparing. And the Holy 50 Days, which we're living now, is what we'll be celebrating in heaven. So now we're living in Lent, we're preparing for the joyous time. And it's just as a little aside, this is kind of tying into sort of the church and the church fathers. They knew more about human psychology than we kind of sort of, or we're learning more about how much they know about human psychology than we do now. Because the church has the proper rhythm for our lives versus what the world has. And you see this especially around the holidays, where let's say with Christmas especially, the weeks, days leading up to Christmas, you have holiday parties here and all sorts of parties everywhere, all the time leading up till Christmas. You have Christmas Day, the 26th, what happens? Nothing. It's all gone. I mean, you can even walk around and you'll see some houses already have their Christmas trees thrown out on the next day. And then you have that with every holiday, where people celebrating, leading up to the holiday happens, and then there's nothing. And that leads to depression with people. You hear the holiday blues, right? And that's what happens, is there's all this big build up, people are celebrating, and when the actual event happens, it's anticlimactic, there's nothing to it. Whereas with the church, we're the opposite. We're fasting, we're preparing ourselves, we're going through a period of preparation. So we're down to when the feast hits, we celebrate. And especially, with Easter and stuff, it's like Coptic Mardi Gras from Easter on. But with every feast, we know how to celebrate. You have the period of preparation before, and once the feast hits, you celebrate, and it tapers off naturally. So it's a more natural rhythm to our lives. And the other thing is how many of you have seen, and a lot of times, all the stuff the church is telling us to do, to fast, to pray, attending the liturgies, attending all the rites of the church, a lot of times we don't get it. It's boring. Why do we have to do that? There are other Christians that don't do that, and I'm sure they get into heaven. And again, this is where I tell you, I know where God is. I can't tell you where he's not. And there are a couple of analogies that sort of tie to this. One is that for a mountain climber. You've ever seen those guys that climb up on the big mountains where the ice, they have the boots with the claws on them, the crampons, and they have the ice axes. And they're wearing big heavy coats, obviously, for the cold and whatnot. Let's say if they're going to climb Mount Kilimanjaro that's in Africa. The top is snow-covered, but at the base, it's pretty much a desert. So if you have someone who's going to climb this mountain, at the base of the mountain, he's got his big heavy winter coat and his ice pickaxe and the spikes on his boots. He looks stupid walking around this desert village. And for the first part of the journey, this seems unnecessary. Why do I have all this stuff with me? As he climbed higher and higher, it makes more and more sense why he has all this stuff with him. And it becomes essential, and he needs this to help him achieve the summit of this mountain. Maybe an example you guys could relate to or understand better. Who's seen the movie The Karate Kid? The original one with Mr. Miyagi, not the stupid new one that they remade. Anyone see the original one?
I've seen it.
Yeah.
You were not born at that time.
I know most of them weren't born at that time, but maybe they show it in reruns on TV or something. All right, if you ever get a chance, watch it. But you didn't hear that from me. All right. Even in the stupid remake, which isn't as good, it has the same principle. Did anyone at least see the new one, remake with Will Smith's kid? Let me guess, they spend all their time in praying and they don't go out.
That's absolutely true.
Okay. Then al-khati. I live too much in this world. Anyway, you've all heard the phrase wax on, wax off. Good, thank you, someone. It comes from the movie The Karate Kid, where this kid's getting bullied and he wants this old guy, Japanese guy, to teach him karate. So he goes to him and basically this guy has him doing chores around the house, has him paint the fence and shows him a specific way to paint the fence, up and down. Then next day he takes him and has him wax his car, wax on, wax off, and shows him in a very specific way how to do it. And there's a whole series of chores which he has him do in a very specific way. At the end of a certain period of time, the kid's complaining, going, "What are you doing? I came to you to teach me karate and all you're doing is working me like a slave." So he had him repeat all those moves that he showed him how to do, like paint the fence, wax the car, sand the floor, and each of these ended up being, in actuality, karate moves, which he could use. And it's the same thing with all what we're doing now is what we're doing in church, in liturgy. Why the church has us fast, why it has us pray these number of days, these number of times a day, which is how many? Thank you. Sometimes I get worried. So 7 times a day. We should be. If you pray once or twice, I think everyone will be very happy. And has us pray these Psalms. And people go, well, that's boring. Why am I reading these words and not just making up my own prayers? Because most of us don't really know how to pray. We're never really taught properly how to pray. So the church in its wisdom gives us the Psalms so we can pray them on our behalf. And it's the only book in the Bible that's written in the first person. And it's written in the first person so those words can become ours. And then once you use them and learn through them, you learn how to pray and then you can build off of them. It's your template to start and build off of. If any of you guys are athletes, when you start any sport, they'll show you the basic proper forms, right? And then from there, you can build off of those forms to then excel in your sport. But you still need to learn the basic form, either whether or not you're throwing a free throw or if you're running, proper technique. So it's doing all this to get us ready, to get us in the right mindset of what it's like to be in heaven and to want to be in heaven. Even in the liturgy, which is, the closest we can be to heaven on earth, and it's an actual glimpse. And if you think of, well, for me, it always, like when I serve in the altar, strikes me with awe and like I don't want to be there. Not because it's not great, but I don't feel in myself that worthy of being there in the altar. Because there is the actual body, actual blood of Christ. Christ is there. He's there in front of us. And what is that but being in heaven, where we will be there with Christ and we will know him as he is and who he is, and we'll be united with him. And we get a bit of that when we partake of the Eucharist. And that's why heaven is an eternal Eucharistic feast. And we're in heaven, we're in liturgy to get us used to what being in heaven is and what being with God is like. Why does Abuna go through the whole commemoration of saints? They know who they are. God knows who they are. He's reciting their names because he's reminding us that they're there with us, around us, partaking of this sacrifice with us. That we are now in heaven. And to get us to that point of understanding is why we have all the other things that we do around being in liturgy, where we do the fasting. They tell us to read our Bibles. They tell us to do all these little things are little exercises to get us in the proper mindset, to have us start experiencing Christ, so that when we actually do experience him in the liturgy, we know him for who he is and understand that fact. Because a lot of times we just go in, we're just sitting there waiting till it's about 11:30. Abuna should be doing communion now, so we'll be done. Go up. We treat it, what is it? The phrase in Arabic, aklaish. We just go in and, all right, grab it and go so I can tell my mom, or yeah, I went to church today, or just to assuage my own little guilt about what I did the night before or whatever. And the thing is all this is to have us start experiencing Christ in our lives. What the church tells us to do, it knows from experience, from being with him for 2,000 years. The church is the bride of Christ. And if God is our Father, as we pray in the Our Father every day, every time we pray it, the church, being his bride, is our mother. And it's teaching us about our Father and how to know him and who he is. And if you're... And if you're doing it, well, before I get to that point, and it's not, we don't do this for God's sake. He doesn't need our fasting. He doesn't need me praying to him, because a lot of times what our prayers are is telling God what he already knows and what he should be doing about it. He doesn't need any of this from us. We're the ones who need to do this for our benefit. It's our training. It's our exercise to be able to climb this mountain, to get of this life, to be able to reach the summit with God in the next. And if we're doing this and it's not working and we're not experiencing God, sorry to say, the flaw isn't in the training regimen, so to speak. The flaw is with us. We're doing it wrong. And it ends up being harmful to us. Anyone here has ever lifted? Okay. Anyone does any exercise? I'm starting to wonder. Again, yeah. I didn't know that the level of the group was up here, doctor. Otherwise, I would have refused to speak to them. I'm like right here. Any exercise, if you've ever done, what is the thing they teach you?
Don't be so tough to them. Try it out.
Work with me a little bit, I'll work with you. And up until this point, any questions thus far, or you're like, if we're quiet, I'll finish fast and I can get out of here? Because I know I've done this to speakers too myself, so. Anyway, back to my point. Any sort of exercise, what do they emphasize? Proper form. Because if you don't, you can injure yourself. Especially, let's say, if you're lifting and you're, let's say, doing squats or whatever, if you don't have proper form, you're going to injure yourself. And it's the same thing where if we're doing the things that the church lays out for us the wrong way, it's going to injure us spiritually. For example, one of the biggest things that's abused greatly and done the wrong way is fasting. And the church fathers themselves call like an improper fast, like one where the emphasis is on food, a demonic fast. And I've heard that from Abu Antonius himself, and he's got a point where we'll give up the 25-cent chicken wing so we can have the $40 sushi meal and say we're fasting. And that's completely backwards. If anything, I'm better off eating the 25-cent wings and donating the other $39.75 to the poor. So, it's in doing these things wrong, it injures us spiritually, and we end up we don't end up experiencing God through it, and we end up then discarding it as being flawed. The church is just throwing burdens on us for the hell of it, for its own sadistic joy. Actually, the funny thing is I have a lot of Protestant friends. It's good they're not shocked. Oh no, he deals with Protestants too? Who did you bring for us, Dr. Sin? Who are actually start talking to me about they've discovered fasting, this principle of fasting. Like in certain Protestant denominations, fasting is the latest and greatest thing. And they call it a Daniel fast after the fast in the book of Daniel. So they'll reduce the amount of food and they'll only eat vegetables. Sounds very familiar. And they'll talk to me like this is the greatest and most amazing spiritual experience in their lives. And I'm looking at them like, duh, we've been doing this in the Orthodox churches, we've been doing this since the beginning, but we who own this are so ready to throw it away while other people are rediscovering it for themselves, reinventing the wheel, and they're like, this is amazing. So we have to understand if these things aren't working for us, talk to a spiritual father, spiritual mother. Yes, you can have spiritual mothers as well, but they're not so many accessible in this area, but they do exist. Just so that you know, the church isn't this patriarchal, anti-feminist organization, which seems to be the vogue thoughts of the day. As an aside to that, sorry for the little side rant, but when they refer to all of us as sons of God, women included, it's not that we're saying being female is not as important as being a male, but when we refer to sons of God, it's that when God sits in judgment of us, He's ideally should be seeing Christ within us. In that way, since we are all bearing Christ, should be ideally, we are all sons of God. That's a little aside, neither here nor there. So, not to just belabor this point, but So the purpose of everything that we're doing here and everything that they're trying to teach us, that's laid out for us to do, is preparation for the next life. What we have here is a shadow of the things to come. That being in heaven is going to be eternal communion with God. All right. I mean, that's the bulk of everything. If there's any questions, comments, something you want to clarify, or want to tell me I'm wrong in,
I want to comment on something that Peter was saying concerning praying with the Son. We just read the story today. And it talks about this simple guy who's not highly educated, and he got into the military service in Egypt. So they sent him to a place where there was a minefield.
yeah, minefield.
Yeah. And then they were supposed to be a big sign, do not enter, but he couldn't read. So one night he wanted to pray. He was well versed into, he learned the psalm. So he kept the psalm and wanted to pray. So he went out to walking and started praying the psalm. So he would walk into the minefield, and he walks in there and he's praying. He's very much concentrated in the praying and the prayer that he's saying, the psalm that he's reciting. And his colleagues saw him walking and so started shouting at him, and he heard them. And then he finished praying, came back. He was walking in the minefield, so he expected that he would be blown up. So he finished his prayers, came back. So the captain of that unit, he treated him very badly because he was the only Christian in that group. So he was like very decent with him at that time. He spoke with him in a very kind way. Before he used to curse him and shout at him, and this guy was so true Christian, so he was so decent and kind, and he received everything in a very Christian way, and responded in a Christian way. So at that time, this boss came to me and said, "Son, tell me, what were you doing there?" So he said, "Nothing, I was just praying." He said, "You prayed? What were you praying?" He said, "We have something that's called psalms." These are Muslim people in Egypt.
This is a true story. This is a
It's
true
a true
story.
story. So he started to say, "I was reciting some psalms I learned and I was praying with this psalm." So he said, they asked him, and then he said to him, "And what are these hands that were surrounding you?" He said, "What hands?" The guy very simple. So they saw two hands surrounding him and a light shining on this guy while he was walking in this minefield. Until he finished the prayers and he came out to them. This guy, this is a true story, it's not fiction. And then it says that from that day his leader, his top leader, treated him very, very, very well. A few years later, when he finished his military service, went back home, and he finds someone knocking his door. And to his surprise, that was the leader, very high rank in the army over there. And he's coming to him and he says to him, "I came to say hi, and I wanted to say thank you for that day you opened my eyes to the truth." And he turned to believe and become a Christian because of that experience that he saw at that night, because of one simple guy who was doing the exercise right. Understand the idea of what Peter was saying? He was just doing the right thing. He was praying with the sound, and it was very simple. And to him, it was like regular practice. He didn't feel like this is going to make any difference in anyone's life. He didn't think of that. But all what he needed, that he wanted assurances from God. When he prays the Son, there are assurances that you receive. And a comment that another thing about the Psalm that I read yesterday night, I don't know why I was reading all these things, but Senator Nations was talking about how the Psalms have done so many purposes for you to use when you're in a time of difficulty, when you're in a time of joy, sadness, despair, trouble, enemies coming against you. There are Psalms that you can pray and God will send you help and give you comfort in your life if you are using them and praying them. As Peter was saying, this is the right practice. When we pray this thing and we do that, we benefit so much. But since we don't do it right, we might injure ourselves.
Yeah, and Abuna's story reminded me of two things. And the thing that Abuna was reading is St. Athanasius' letter to Marcellinus. You can find it online. It's very short. It's very easy to read. Actually, there's an audio version online somewhere.
It's very,
It's very short. You can read it in one sitting, and it's very deep. And it's like Abuna says, it literally goes, if you're feeling joyful, and it lists which Psalms to pray. If you feel upset, Psalms XYZ, pray those. So, so as Abuna was saying, it just reminded me of 2 points. One is the fact that people in the past have seemed to have been better at praying the Psalms than we do in this modern age. And one example of that was, and not even like way in the past, like from my childhood, I remember the person when they used to go out to give the Psalms, wouldn't, like nowadays they go around going Psalm 12, Psalm 13, Psalm whatever. When I was younger, the person would just go around and just say the first line of the Psalm. And because people would have these memorized, the minute he heard, "The Lord is my shepherd," he knew which Psalm it was and he could pray it from memory. And this was my childhood growing up here in Jersey. This isn't in Egypt back in the Middle Ages when this was a good number of years ago. But in my childhood, it was...
That's what was happening in Egypt also, right?
Yeah, it's Egypt.
If we know some Psalms by heart, I don't remember how we learned it. I don't remember. But I remember one of our Sunday school teachers in summertime, when we go to the summer camp, we would pray the 11th hour and the 12th hour, so mostly the 11th hour, and he would let every one of us, when we were praying, read a psalm. Every one of us would read a psalm, and the rest are standing and listening to it. And we did not realize that when we were reading a psalm or listening to a psalm, actually we're recording it. So if it kept happening all summertime, at the end of the summer, you learn the psalm not because you try to recite them, but because you heard them. Either you were reading them or someone else was reading them, and you were standing and listening to them. So all these are practices that it's a pity we don't do that anymore. Imagine if we do that now. Everyone read a psalm and pray in a loud voice.
I was telling we can do that with songs instead of psalms.
Well, actually, Peter mentioned the Protestant church. The Protestants now, all what they're doing is getting the Psalms and
Putting them to music.
putting them into music, and they sing the Psalms. And actually, St. Athanasius said in this letter, he said, "Hey, listen, you cannot just read the Psalm; you've got to sing it." And that was actually the practice in the Desert Father. Everyone would sing a psalm, and the rest are standing and listening to the person singing the psalm. So nowadays, that's what the Protestants are doing. They discover the songs, I think, nowadays.
Yeah.
So they're singing the songs, and they become songs. Many of our songs, if you notice, might be parts of the songs. And we have a lot of songs like that, which is very useful. You can do that.
And the other thing that Abuna's story reminded me of is, you all have heard of anchorites or sawah, and how they can do all these sort of miraculous things, translocate no things. It's because they're approaching as high as they can on earth to heaven. So they're getting a taste of the glorified flesh that we will have when we resurrect from the dead. So because they've experienced Christ so much through the rites and the sacraments and the prayers, that they get a tiny hair glimpse of what the glorified flesh will be like.
You could relate to that when you read about Moses. When he spent 40 days with God, he came down from the mountain, and no one could look at his face because his face was shining, just because he spent 40 days with God. I mean, so the Christ spent more with that.
Yeah. There's that, and there's... Yeah, and just a bonus point about the Protestants not taking Psalms, and this past Easter I spent it in California with my brother-in-law, and he's a priest out there, and he has this one very highly educated Protestant convert, and he complains, his common complaint is, you Copts like to get rid of what you have, and you guys aren't even good Protestants when you are Protestants. That even we can't even be proper Protestants. He's like, you do songs that if you went to a Protestant church now, they'd laugh at you for singing because he just would call us bad Protestants, which I thought was funny coming from a former Protestant. That he's like, at least do it right if you're going to do it. Because he's like, you're quick to get rid of everything, but you have nothing to replace it with. So, anyway, thank you for your time, and I guess if you guys have any other questions, comments, want clarification on anything,